Do you feel the urge to move toward a more play-based practice and just don't know how to do it? Or maybe you're struggling to incorporate more child-led learning into your otherwise teacher-led program. The research is clear. Play is how children learn best during the early childhood years, but creating a classroom where play is the focus isn't always as straightforward as it may seem. I'm your host, Jen Zollinger. Join me as we explore the incredible ways that play serves preschool children and how to best implement it in your classroom. This is Play Before Pencils. I took a recent poll on my Instagram page that revealed a large percentage of teachers follow a daily schedule. That makes sense, right? Schedules are necessary to keep things moving on time. I'm going to suggest a slight modification to this way of thinking, though. Rather than keeping a schedule, consider following a routine. Right out of the gate, that might sound like pretty much the same thing, but there is a difference. A schedule is usually tied to the clock, and in a classroom setting, we tend to break our days up into chunks of time which are designated for specific activities. Let me give you an example. In my first classroom, the schedule for my 2.5-hour class period looked something like this. From 9 to 9:20, as children were arriving, centers were available for them to explore. Then from 9:20 to 9:40, we had an opening circle time where we welcomed everybody to school, did calendar, sang some songs. And then from 9:40 to 10 was free play. Yes, it was only 20 minutes back then. From 10 to 10:15, we had a snack. And then from 10:15 to 11:15, we had a large group and a small group time. This chunk of the day was part of the reason that we needed to follow a somewhat strict schedule, because this was a special education classroom. And while most of my therapy aides pulled kids individually during the class time, nearly all of the children in my class were receiving some degree of speech and language therapy. So my SLP would come into the classroom to provide part of the services to everybody in a group setting. The first 30 minutes of this part of the day was spent as a large group at the rug. We usually had a story and some sort of activity to go along with it, like acting the story out or using pictures to sequence and retell the story in order to help work on language and communication skills. The SLP and I traded weeks teaching this large group time, and it was seriously the hardest part of my day. Back then, I thought it was because I was a young and fairly inexperienced teacher that didn't have a great handle on the behaviors in her class, but I know now that expecting 3 to 5-year-olds to sit for 30 minutes and stay engaged in a group activity was simply unrealistic. That's another topic for another day, though. The last 30 minutes of this hour of our schedule was spent in small groups, which were run by the SLP, and I had a small group, and then I had 2 paraprofessionals in my class that each ran a small group as well. So those lasted about 7 minutes, and the children rotated through each one. Then from 11:15 to 11:30, we had a short closing circle and wrapped up our class. This classroom was very teacher-directed and obviously had little time for any free choice at all. 20 minutes of free play. It was honestly exhausting to keep things clipping along at the pace that we had set, especially considering the high needs of some of my students. Looking back, I completely understand the necessity of having a designated time for the SLP to be in my classroom, but if I were in that situation again, I would completely restructure our day so that we could take into account the developmental needs of the students rather than the convenience of the adults in the classroom. When I started my own program, I knew that I wanted to be a lot more flexible in how I ran my day. So my classroom today follows a routine rather than a schedule. We keep the same general structure every day, with occasional deviations, but we aren't nearly as tied to the clock. There's obviously a need to be mindful of times because our classes do eventually come to an end, but I don't have a hard start and stop time for almost anything that we do. My 3-hour class routine today looks like this. We arrive, and I should preface this by saying that I have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to starting the day because my drop-off area is just outside of my neighborhood, so we walk to the classroom as a group. I meet everybody, parents drop off, we come to the classroom together. I'm not dealing with a period of time when students are filtering in one at a time like I've had in other places I've taught. So we start our first activity of the day as a group, and that's yoga. We do a short yoga routine every day. Then after yoga, we have a short morning meeting where we sing a welcome song, we count how many friends are in class that day, maybe take note of who's missing. And if there are any special instructions for the day, we go over those. And then free choice play starts. Now, depending on the engagement of the children, it can last anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes. So there's about a 30-minute period of flex in there. During this time, I'm fairly hands-off. If we have a particular study or a project going on, I will engage with the children in various aspects of that. Otherwise, I'm mostly observing and taking notes. Once in a while, I will set up a small group activity, but it's always optional because I really hate interrupting children's play to pull them for a small group. If I feel that there is a need to work on a particular skill with a student, I try to do it through guided play when that's appropriate. Toward the end of free choice play, there is an optional snack, and then we head outdoors for 30 to 45 minutes. Again, there's another 15-minute-ish period of flex in there. When we return to the indoor classroom, we have storytelling, followed by closing circle, and then we head home. The only real hard start and stop times are dictated by the beginning and the end of our class time, and the rest is very fluid and flexible. I feel like letting go of a strict schedule is one of the best ways that I can be more attuned to the needs of the students in my class. So between that free play period, both indoors and outdoors, there's approximately 45 minutes of flex time in there. So if we start indoor play and the children are just struggling to get along, or I see that they're expressing a need for more big body play than we have indoor space for, we can head outdoors earlier and stay out longer. Once in a while, there will be a whole class collaborative play activity happening indoors, and the engagement level is high enough that I will sacrifice a little bit of our outdoor time to extend that learning a little bit longer. Our morning meeting is generally very short, but occasionally somebody will ask a question that sparks a discussion, and before we know it, 30 minutes have passed. So not feeling like we're bound by the clock allows for easy adjustment as these types of things pop up. And I rarely feel rushed like I did in that first classroom where I knew that at 10:15 I'd have the SLP in my room and we had to be ready for that. Children naturally feel more secure when a predictable routine is in place. Think back a few years ago to the early weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic. That experience threw many of us into a bit of a tailspin as we tried to make adjustments to our work and family routines. I heard from many parents that their children were really struggling, and they were starting to see new or increased unpleasant behaviors that hadn't been present before. I have no doubt that the uncertainty of what each new day was going to look like contributed to this. The loss of a routine kind of just threw everybody off. Children need anchor points throughout the day, and predictable routines provide those anchor points. This does not mean that our routines have to be exactly the same every single day. Children enjoy novelty, and they often adapt with very little effort. But it is important that we keep them informed along the way. In a classroom setting, I like to use a picture schedule to lay out our day. There are certain pictures that never move. They are the anchor points in our day, such as the indoor play, the outdoor play, our snack. Those things happen every day without fail. And then there are pictures that come in and out depending on our plans. Once a week or so, we have a baking experience where we make our snack together. This deviation from the norm is added to our picture schedule, and we talk about it during our morning meeting so that everybody can be prepared for the change in that day's routine. Picture schedules are an easy way for children to track progress throughout the day and be able to anticipate what is coming next. As I've said in previous episodes, I work for myself, so I have ultimate flexibility in how I want to structure my day. But what about situations where you don't have that kind of flexibility? I once worked in a program where the schedule was broken up into 30-minute increments, and we rotated through 5 different classrooms for each of the different focus areas of the day: calendar, free play, table work, snack time, and art. I had zero flexibility when it came to making alterations to this schedule. When our 30 minutes were up, Another class was on our heels, waiting to use the classroom that we were in, so we had to move on. I was 100% tied to the clock with that schedule. But one thing I did have some flexibility in was how I chose to spend those 30 minutes. The point of a routine is to allow for predictability in our day, but it also is to allow for some flexibility and adjustment based on student engagement. I couldn't make adjustments to the overall schedule in this program, but I could find times for flex within those 30-minute chunks of time where I could follow the lead of the children. I think that particular program was a little more on the extreme side when it comes to the lack of flexibility, but perhaps you're in a situation where maybe you share an outdoor space with multiple classes and you have a designated time during the day to use it. You are tied to the clock for that particular portion of your day, and that's okay. It still serves as an anchor point in your routine. And while you may not have the option for flex in the amount of time that you spend outdoors as a result of the overall school schedule, it is still a part of your routine, and you can focus on finding flex in other portions of your day. One advantage that I have found to following a flexible routine rather than a strict schedule is that I'm better able to manage transitions. We know that transitions can be a trigger for problem behavior, especially when children don't feel ready to move on. When we are following the lead of the children, their engagement level helps determine when it's time to move on to something new, and the transition feels much more natural. Schedules that are tied to the clock often include more transitions, and they can feel very abrupt, which is unsettling for children. In the first schedule that I shared earlier in the podcast, we had 8 transitions during the class time. That's actually a lot for a 2.5-hour period of time. In the second schedule, we had 4 by-the-clock transitions as we moved classrooms, but then within each classroom, there were 4 or 5 different tasks on the lesson plan, which required transitions as well. So in any given day, we could have upwards of 25 transitions in a 2.5-hour period of time. That is crazy. In my current program, on a regular day without any extra activities, we have 4 transitions, and they feel pretty seamless because they are led by the children. As you move toward a more child-led practice, finding flexibility in your day is going to be key, and moving away from a schedule that is tied to the clock is a great way to start easing into this type of practice. As the structure of your day becomes more fluid based on the needs of the children, I think that you'll find they are more content in the time they spend in your classroom, leading them to greater engagement and deeper learning. Thanks again for listening. Remember to hit that subscribe button to continue learning how to bring more play into your classroom. Plus, get more tips on Instagram at play_before_pencils or at playbeforepencils.com.